So on the topic of freedom of speech, here's some from Noam Chomsky. I do have another video or two on Noam Chomsky, and you can definitely check those out on my channel. So I say here that suppressing freedom of speech with good intentions is not necessarily a wise idea. Censorship is dangerous any way you cut it, no matter how you slice it. So Noam goes on to say here, this is his actual quote, Goebbels was in favor of free speech for views that he liked. So was Stalin. If you're really in favor of free speech, then you're in favor of freedom of speech for precisely the views that you despise. Otherwise, you're not in favor of free speech. Okay? So there are a number of people out there that I've encountered, both personally and, of course, sort of on the internet, but actually some people in my friend group seem to believe that when they're calling for censorship, they're still for free speech. And, of course, the Overton window of acceptable speech, there are some extremes, some exceptions that society at large has generally decided on. Credible threats, incitements to violence. You have things like direct harm, calling fire in a crowded theater. And then you have things like unconsented pornography, defamation, slander, libel, doxing. And there's a few other things where even a free speech absolutist, it's kind of an oxymoron, I guess, because I'm not really absolute. You know, when you think in absolutes, you're kind of actually, it's sort of an ignorant position to think in very, very, very absolute terms in a world that offers a very subjective reality, and opinions, of course, being subjective. But I consider myself nearly a nigh absolutist when it comes to free speech. I am not a disciple of the modern religion of censorship. But there are things that, create public harm and are generally not very savory. Of course, we can all agree, for the most part, we can almost all agree that those things should not be allowed in the public square because they endanger people directly. Okay? Now, suggesting something, an opinion that, someone can take or they could leave, doesn't really matter. But if somebody says something that could cause indirect harm, say for example, I happen to be pro-vaccine, but I understand that some people are anti-vaccine. Now vaccines, if you take an absolute position of pro-vax, absolute, well, I don't really take an absolute position, I just err on the side of pro-vax, because there are, in the case of some people, vaccines that can harm them. Vaccines are not for everybody. Of course, I'm not going to make any claims on vaccines today. You check with a subject matter expert, and that would not be Jeff Tidwell on this subject. But I don't believe that those that are speaking in terms of anti-vax, that are sort of skeptical of the vaccines, should be removed from the public square. I think that they, at the very least, provide a service in determining, well, which vaccines out here, we need to take them. If I don't believe that we should be forced by the government to take them. But it's possible that certain public services, should be restricted to those that have taken vaccines, because it would be a threat to the public if, a virus broke out because somebody, chose not to take a vaccine. And if it's a public service, say as a public school, for example, I think there are questions as to whether a child that has not been vaccinated should go. Of course, those are very, very important questions because it can change the trajectory of an entire life of a person if they can't go to a school, depending on their economic situation and so forth. But I don't believe that, for example, that vaccines cause autism. That's one thing that people always talk about. But there are questions about vaccines. Actually, Dr. Jill Stein, who ran for president in 2016 and 2012, she actually had some questions about vaccines. And that doesn't mean she's anti-vax per se. It just means she doesn't have an absolute position. She has a nuanced position that allows her to look at things and ask questions and really question the authorities and question the science and continue the scientific method, Just keep on asking questions on top of questions and get deeper, drill down deeper and deeper into the information to determine what the truth is, or the closest approximation to the truth, as the truth itself is virtually unknowable or unknowable. So even a dictator was in favor of free speech for views that he liked. So if you'd like to be less authoritarian than a dictator, you have to accept views that you despise in the public square, the modern public square that is the internet. Now, of course, you do have your household. You have, maybe your Facebook page or your Twitter profile. I mean, you can mute and block and remove posts if you'd like from your internet household, of course. But we're talking about this mass wave of censorship on the internet. The prophets of the modern religion of censorship that are basically telling people, they're making the authoritarian decision of, hey, this isn't acceptable. Okay, they're trying to slowly but surely make these views, take them out of the outside of the Overton window of acceptable dialogue. Now, as far as I'm concerned, it should be a little closer to here. We should be able to talk about things as long as they don't cause direct harm and all the things I listed earlier. If they cause indirect harm, it's at the discretion of a human being, a person, to do or not do the things that they're seeing. Of course, and I say seek subject matter experts, and try to find people that are experts. And of course, Richard Feynman did say that science is the belief in the ignorance of the experts, and I do warn against, blindly putting faith into institutions such as academia, media, or state. I put those under the modern religion that is institutions. When you cast aside reason and take on this faith that everything will work out, and you look for moral virtue and universal truth in authority, I mean, it is a difficult road to walk, because we do want to trust those. We don't want to be anti-intellectual. We don't want to push away those that have information. We don't want to push away scientists, but we do have to understand that they are people too. They are imperfect too. So keeping our question asking muscle warmed up and fresh is the key. And I do try to do that as much as possible. I like to challenge my confirmation bias. I like to exercise my cognitive dissonance. And if I see something that triggers me or troubles me, I like to look a little closer and actually get a full range of opinions and facts about the situation before I get too emotionally involved and I let my first impression take me away from the truth. Like, I don't want to push away a difficult or uncomfortable or inconvenient truth just because I have an emotional reaction. I want to fight against that. It can be rather difficult at times, actually. But if you exercise those muscles, you'll have an easier time.